Mr. Speaker, let me take the opportunity to always thank the people of Dennery South, particularly Dennery Village, Laka and Lima, for electing me to be the parliamentary rep and to make me be very proud of myself standing there in this honorable house to represent them. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to express my condolences to the family of the former Speaker and to say to the family, to ask them to, be strong as they go through their period of bereavement. Mr. Speaker, in the throne speech by the acting Governor General, His Excellency Cyril Charles, he focused on the anti-corruption and emphasized a zero-tolerance approach to corruption. The Hon. Prime Minister Philip J. Pierre additionally stated in his budget policy statement that legislation respecting the appointment of a special prosecutor to carry out investigations into acts of alleged public corruption would be enacted during this financial year 2022-2023. Mobile di San Creole, gouvernement général, là il fait speech li pli bonne année ça là, il fait un annoncement that gouvernement ça là pas qu'à supporter rien pour faire corruption. Et honorable Philippe J. Pierre dit après ça that nous devons apporter un special prosecutor pour investiguer acts of corruption. Mr. Speaker, today this government is making this happen. Mr. Speaker, when you allow corruption to flourish, Mr. Speaker, it is not just a few that will suffer in this country. Everybody will suffer, Mr. Speaker, because you are actually depleting the resources of the state and making it more difficult to meet the needs of the people. It diminishes our ability to build and maintain our roads, Mr. Speaker, like the member for Sufre mentioned. Building new schools, Mr. Speaker. Assisting our farmers with fertilizer and other farm inputs, Mr. Speaker. And assisting our young people in terms of employment opportunities, Mr. Speaker. Our social programs, Mr. Speaker, it makes it very difficult for us to be able to meet financial resources, to deliver those programs because of the whole issue of corruption. Now, Mr. Speaker, when I became a candidate, a number of persons, when I visited their homes during the campaign, there was a call. Souhait gouvernement ça la gagne qui pas fait rien about corruption. Ma kay vote by encore. It is because, Mr. Speaker, they are all aware of the levels of corruption that was going on or that has been going on in St. Lucia. And they voted for the St. Lucia Labour Party because we made that an election promise during our campaign, Mr. Speaker. And I'm very happy to be part of this team to make sure that we do what we promised the electorates, Mr. Speaker. And I want to say that this is just the beginning. This bill will not solve the problem immediately, Mr. Speaker, but it's a start and a demonstration by this government to prove to the people that we are doing what we promised. Mr. Speaker, every Wednesday when I sit in my constituency office, there are a number of persons coming to me for various forms of assistance. And Mr. Speaker, initially I said, I wonder why I went into this, because they were of the view that once they asked for it, Mr. Speaker, you're just supposed to deliver it to them. They couldn't understand when you said to them that I will try to assist you, I will give you some form of help, but they were of the view that once you are a politician, you should always have the financial resources in your pocket to just give to them. What are they thinking, Mr. Speaker? you tend to wonder whether they think, aside the salary that you get in monthly, there are other means of generating income. And it's because, Mr. Speaker, this has been a concern for our citizens of St. Lucia. And I'm very happy that this government is making a big effort to address it. Mr. Speaker, it's not a bill that speaks only to civil servants. Politicians like us, as I mentioned, people seem to think that we are the most corrupt persons in the country. But this is not the case, Mr. Speaker. And I want to call on them to let them know that this is not the case. Mr. Speaker, it is not the case for persons on this side, Mr. Speaker. This bill is a new bill, Mr. Speaker, and it really demonstrates a bold step by this government to address the problem of corruption. I'm happy that my government is taking that bold step in appointing a special prosecutor, because a special prosecutor would need to direct the operations or the procedures in terms of investigating corruption, Mr. Speaker. Too often in the past, we've played a blind eye on corruption. It's as if we want it to continue to fester. Persons will think twice before thinking of engaging in corruption following the passage of this bill. So if public officers who have been engaged in it and seem to think that they can continue, Mr. Speaker, from today, this bill will circulate in their minds, Mr. Speaker, that there is legislation in place to deter me from continuing whatever practices or acts of corruption in my day-to-day activities as a public servant. We must really change the way things are done in this country, Mr. Speaker, and corruption is one that I think needs urgent attention, and this bill, as I said, will not solve the corruption problem in its entirety one time, but it is a mechanism that will help to getting this problem under control. Mr. Speaker, I remember the days when my mom and other persons would tell you in Creole, as I quote, "Pas point rien qui passe à haut." And Mr. Speaker, I have grown living a life where I listen to my parents. If it does not belong to me, Mr. Speaker, I will not take it. And this bill is an indication that you tamper with what does not belong to you, the bill will take the necessary actions to deal with the situation. Mr. Speaker, and I want to encourage our young people not to follow this path of corruption, Mr. Speaker. Let them focus, I want them to focus on what we call a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. That's right. A fair day's work for a fair day's pay. So if they focus and remain focused on that principle, Mr. Speaker, they will not even want to think of getting involved in any acts of corruption, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to be long, but I want to say to this Honorable House that I stand in support of this bill because I know it is a step in the right direction to address and deal with all the acts of corruption that has been happening. And I know once and for all, Mr. Speaker, the St. Lucia Labour Party is delivering on a promise that it made in its election campaign to address all acts of corruption by this bill that we have before us for discussion, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my PM for giving us the opportunity to speak to it. And I want to say before closing, I stand in support of this bill. Thank you.